Hello everybody, and thank you for joining us today for our Office 365 migration webinar. Today we'll be joined by Jessica Meets from Core and John Gorton from Byte Software Services.
Thank you for that. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about Office 365 and some of the newer highlights. As a little bit of background, Core are a partner of Bytes. We work with a range of software including SharePoint, Office 365, System Center, but one of our core offerings is around the cloud. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the key bits of Office 365, some case studies of things we've done, a little bit about some of the funding which might be available to you to get started with Office 365, and how Core would go about getting started with this. We'll then hand over to John to talk a little bit about licensing. So a little bit about Core. We cover a whole range of topics, a whole range of areas. We are a consultancy company, so we don't sell the licenses, and that's why we work with Bytes, but we will work with you to help put together a strategy for how to move to the Microsoft Cloud. So I'm not going to spend too long on the introduction to Office 365. I'm assuming that most of you, if you're on this call, you are aware of it to a greater or lesser extent, but I will talk about, just to make sure everybody's on the same page, what Office 365 is made up of. It's a cloud offering, a software as a services offering from Microsoft, so rather than having the software on your own premises installed and run and managed by yourselves, it's sitting out of a Microsoft data center that you have access to and subscribe to, and you pay on a per month per user basis and get access to all this technology. And there are capabilities around SharePoint, around Exchange, around Link. You can get the desktop versions of the full Office applications, and one of the recent changes is something called Power BI. So a few things I want to show in some demos. Power BI, something called OneDrive, which was formerly known as SkyDrive until Microsoft had a little bit of an argument with Sky, and eDiscovery and Holds. So I'll actually escape from the slide deck now and go and show my demos. So Power BI started with something called PowerView, and this is a way of surfacing information in a visual way, an interactive way. And if you've got SharePoint Online, if you've got one of the higher SKUs, you may already have this. And this allows you to play around with data, pull together data, and have a very rich visual dashboard. So I can come into this, it's just through a browser, it's through SharePoint. You'll notice the little Office 365 logo in the top left-hand corner. And I can come into this and say, I wonder what's happening in this section, and it goes and filters my chart. Or I can come and click a section over here and it filters by something differently, or I wonder how Australia's doing. So I get this very slick, very interactive view of my data. But all of this is driven from the back end by data sources provided through SharePoint. So there are different ways we can view this data, and one of the new things that Power BI provides is a way of managing all of this. So I've got this new Power BI portal, and I can see some of my top dashboards, I can see questions, and I can come down and look for data connections and reports where all this information is being pulled in from. And there are some very clever things you can do with this now, so it's not just about putting up a few charts. I can start interrogating this data. So here I've got one which is timed out, unfortunately, around birth trends. So we've got some data around people being born and dying, which is potentially interesting if you want to start figuring out what are the patterns, what are the trends, what's going on in different parts of the world. So I've got this chart here, and I can actually start doing predictive information on it. So I've just scrolled out to one side and I can get estimates based on previous trends of what the birth rate is likely to be in the future. But I'm not sure how accurate this is, so what I can do is actually drag back over the past and say, if it made a guess, what would it have thought for recent months. And you can see actually if it had guessed in 2010, it actually would have been fairly accurate. If I go back a little further, and suddenly the estimate, which is this paler line, is miles above. So apparently in recent years the population hasn't grown as much as people were expecting. And I can come in and I can filter this and I can look at just a single country and see how this works in the UK versus the others. But what we've got here is a way of starting to analyse data, to interrogate data just in a web browser, just in Office 365. And similarly, we can do things using what's referred to as natural language processing. So you don't necessarily have to go in and play around with tables and charts and numbers and know exactly what's going on. You can essentially ask questions of your data. So here I've got some information about Olympics, and somebody has asked a question about gold medalists from Italy. So we've got the answers here. And I can come into this and just start playing around and ask different questions. So I'm going to start asking about Great Britain. And if you're paying attention, you'll probably have noticed that I've mistyped Britain and it still knows what I'm talking about. And even cleverer than that, actually in the data it's down as United Kingdom. And it knows that those two are the same thing, and it's pulling back the information I want, even though I've not got the words precisely right. So this is what I mean about language processing. It's able to interpret what I've asked for and give me what I want. And I can come around and I can ask different questions. I can change the requirements. I can start summing it up in different ways. So apparently we had 114 athletes in 2012, and I can break these down in different ways, and I can break them down in other ways. And all I'm doing is I'm asking questions, I'm throwing things in this. And I once did this as a demo, and somebody spotted that the gender mixed came up and went, hang on, how on earth can you have gender mixed? So I just came in and said, what sports have mixed gender? And it comes up and answers my question for me. It's just interrogating this data very quickly, very slickly, and just providing me the information I want. So this is all through the Power BI piece of Office 365, which is one of the newer pieces. The other things I wanted to talk about, things like OneDrive. So the reason I brought this up is just because there's been a little confusion over this change of name. So originally you had SkyDrive and you had SkyDrive Pro. Now you have OneDrive and OneDrive for Business. What you get with Office 365 is OneDrive for Business, and this has two halves to it. One half is essentially a place for you to keep your information within Office 365. So here I've got my own little document library, and I can just put things in here. So I've got a bunch of different documents that I've stuck in here, and most of them have a little padlock icon next to them. So only I can see these. Even if somebody searches for this exact file name, they will not see this because it is only shared with me. This is my personal private document store, unless I choose otherwise. So I can come in here and say, actually this one is shared with some people. And I can look at that and see, right, who have I shared it with? So I've given Hannah here view edits on this document. So one of my colleagues, I've said, she is allowed to open up this file and see it. She can have it turn up in search results for her. She cannot edit it because I've not given her permissions, unless I come in and say, actually, yeah, I'm going to let her edit. And I can come in and I can invite other people. I can invite people based on an email address, so you can share things externally quite simply. So I can just come in here and just type in an external address and send out an invite and give people rights. So it's a very quick, simple way of starting to do document sharing. And in terms of putting content in here, it's amazingly simple. I can just come in, got a document on my desktop, drag in, it's uploading. I now have a new document in there. Very quick, very simple sharing it. And you then have this shared with everybody folder. So the idea is that your main folder is private unless you say otherwise. This one by default anybody in your organisation has read permissions on this. Again, you can come in and you can play with the settings, but it's your space, your playground. I said, though, that there were two halves to this. The other half is the desktop piece, which is essentially an offline sync. So what we've got here, it looks like an ordinary File Explorer window, but you'll notice there's a little green tick next to each of the file names. And what I've got here is a folder that is synchronizing from the OneDrive in SharePoint. So it's pulling down and giving me offline versions of my content. And I can come in through the settings and say, I want to sync libraries, I want to synchronize things up. I can choose which parts of SharePoint I want to have locally kept. So I can have all of this information. I've just clicked the sync button, and that's the one I was uploading. That is now synchronized. So I've now got an offline copy. So if I was going to go get on the train to go to a different meeting, I can still work on my files, and they will load up later. So that's the two halves of OneDrive. One is your personal folder for storing and sharing information. The other is this offline sync. The third highlight I'm going to talk about is around eDiscovery. And the reason I pulled this out as a highlight is you've got the option of looking across multiple parts of Office 365. Quite often, although Office 365 is this joined up suite of various offerings, quite often you think of the SharePoint Online piece as one thing and the Exchange Online piece as another and the Link Online piece as another. Whereas actually within the eDiscovery piece you can bring those together. So what we have is this option, is this place, if you've got legal issues, if one of your customers is claiming you're breaching your contract and you need to go through and look at all of the communications you've had with that person, all of the documentation, so you can go into the details. This is where you would use that. So I've got this file, I can create new cases, I can look at what are the cases we've already got, so a bunch of different ones, and actually I've already opened up demo case. So within this you say, what are we looking for? What are we looking for? Where are we looking for it? And I've got actually a couple of search results essentially that I've pulled in information from a couple of data sources, and I can come in and I can query this information. I can say I want to pull in data from different places, so we've got sets of documents that have been discovered in this process. So if, for example, coming back to this scenario that a customer is claiming that we promise things that they haven't received, I can come in and say actually I want to search through all of the communications, all of the documents, where have I worked with this customer. You can do free text query terms, so looking for a customer, so we were working with Contoso. I can say it was between a certain period of time, so we know when it was, we know when we were working with them that they're saying we didn't do what we promised. Filter in different ways. You can go into advanced settings for querying and eliminate particular information, find particular information. And in terms of the sources, you can have multiple sources, and actually you can choose different ways of bringing this data in. So do you want to just find emails? Do you want to find the contact details, so everybody we've communicated with? Link records, or coming through SharePoint and looking for files, looking for things from your sources. So all of these, if I go back a page, within my source information, I have this option to pick different places. So if I want to create a new eDiscovery set and create a new data source, again, it's the same sort of concept. You can search for different things, you can look for key terms, but you can search for particular mailboxes or groups of mailboxes, or you can search for locations within SharePoint. So this is what I was talking about the fact you can bring together the different aspects of Office 365 into one joined up story. So those are my demos. If you're thinking of going to Office 365, if you're looking at moving, there are certain stages that Core would generally recommend and would take people through. So one of those is the idea of the Solution Alignment Workshop. Essentially, this is trying to answer the question of, is this right for you? sitting down with you, talking what are your business requirements, what are you trying to achieve, what do you want to do with Office 365, is this the right fit? And it may be that actually through those conversations, it turns out you want SharePoint on-premise or SharePoint hosted in Azure, or maybe you want to do something different. Maybe you want to do something with Link, and actually it makes more sense to do it in a different way. So we would look at your requirements, your business needs, but also any legal restrictions around location of the data. So does the data have to sit within UK soil? Assuming that at the end of that workshop the answer is yes, Office 365 is the right solution, we would then look at what we refer to as a domain readiness assessment workshop. Essentially, where are you now? How much work needs to be done to get you ready for the cloud? So some of the things you can do with Office 365 are fantastic. And if you're looking at things like identity and single sign-on, you have the ability to use them in a very seamless manner. But that requires potentially that your Active Directory be in a nice state. So if that's a mess, we would look at that and say, okay, you probably want to fix that first. So this is quite a technical workshop. So whereas the solution alignment is very much at a business level, this is technically where are you now, what would you need to do, what are the problems, what are the red flags to make sure you are ready for going to the cloud. And then the third workshop is how you get from A to B. We've worked out what you want to achieve, we've worked out where you are, what are the steps, what are the stages, what order would we do things. And that's where the final planning workshop, so the outcome of that would be a very detailed statement of works around what would happen. So any or all three of these are available. You don't have to necessarily do all of them. In fact, if you do the first one, it turns out that the cloud is not the right answer, then you wouldn't be recommended to go onto them. Core have many customers. I've just pulled out a couple of case studies here, and the reason I've pulled these two out is they are very, very different stories. So one of them, UKTI, is actually a very, very large project for Core. In terms of staff, it's over 1,000 staff in about 100 countries, and it's not just Office 365. This is somewhere where we looked at a whole identity management piece. We pushed out mobile devices to them so that they can access data wherever they are. They wanted a full solution about making sure that all of their users had access to all of their information wherever they were. And at the back end, this is fully supported by Core. They have dedicated staff on our service desk to give them support for this solution. So this was a huge, huge project covering a range of technologies. The other one I've pulled out is Total Jobs, which is back at the other end of the spectrum. And this is a much smaller project because they had some simpler requirements. And actually their first requirement was they just wanted to get Exchange Online up and running. Yes, we've moved on to other aspects of Office 365, but the first requirement was needed to move that email platform. And that now saves them 20 minutes a day for employees because they used to have to spend ages sorting through inboxes to make sure they were reduced. They had a very small inbox size restriction, so staff were spending a lot of time deleting old emails to make sure that they could fit. Now they don't have to spend that much time. And it's cut down on their IT spending, which is good news for everybody in the current economic environment. And this was done with minimal disruption to business. We were able to migrate over during off hours so people didn't even really notice. They basically got told they needed to re-sign in when they opened Outlook to get onto the new email platform. So very, very simple. Both of these case studies, if you want to read them, there's a link in the slide deck, or you can go to Core's website and look at the case studies there. If you want to do this, there are actually a couple of ways you can get funding from Microsoft. One is the DPS days. So the idea is if you've got an enterprise agreement with Microsoft, you may already have deployment planning day vouchers, which essentially mean that Microsoft will pay Core to come in and do some planning with you. There's certain documentation we have to produce, there's certain steps we need to follow, but we would sit down with you, work out essentially where are you, what are you trying to do, all of the things I talked about in those workshop discussions. And you can have these vouchers for 1 day, 3 day, 10 days, depending on how many you've got. You can go into more or less depth. So that's very much around planning. The fast track funding is to help with putting together deployments, proof of concept, pilot programs, to actually help with getting to the cloud. So again, if you buy your licenses, depending on the amount of license, there's an option to get some funding to help with the deployment. And again, this is essentially Microsoft paying Core to come out and do the deployment for you. So ways of getting this with much reduced output from you in terms of money. So different options there. And now I'm going to actually hand over to John to talk about some of the licensing implications.
That's great. Thank you very much, Jess. So I'm just going to talk around the kind of high-level licensing for Office 365. I would encourage you to contact your Bytes account manager for a detailed review of how to move to Office 365. But we will go through this. So there are a number of different options depending on size of organization or type of organization, ranging from consumer versions all the way through to large enterprise and government organizations. So we'll look first of all at the Office 365, a mid-sized business plan. Now, this is typically designed for organizations with between 10 and 250 users, although it does have a hard cap at 300 users. We recommend, if you're approaching 250 users, maybe to look at one of the enterprise plans. So the mid-sized business plan includes full email, so Exchange Online Plan 1, so as your email and calendar within Exchange Online. Excuse me. It also includes SharePoint Online Plan 1, so again, the standard features of SharePoint Server within Microsoft's Cloud. And then it includes Link Online Plan 2, which is the instant messaging, presence, and the video and web conferencing of features of Link. It also includes a per-user Office license for Office 365 Pro Plus. So this is a locally installed Office client. It is always the most up-to-date version, so at the moment it's the equivalent of Office 2013. But that's licensed on a per-user basis and allows you to use Office on up to 5 devices. Let me move on to the Office 365 Enterprise plans. Now, these are designed for any size organizations. It includes a 50 gigabyte mailbox for Exchange Online Plan 1 and 2. SkyDrive Pro, which is now renamed OneDrive, is 25 gigabyte storage. I think that's actually just been announced that it's going to increase to 1 terabyte, if I understand that correctly. It also includes lots of different options, which I'll come on to and show you the different features in a second. So the other plan available is a Kiosk Worker plan. So this is available for users who typically aren't PC users, who you'd want to address and maybe have contact with via email and SharePoint. So desks workers, we call these ones. So these are also available to you. Now on this slide you can see the 4 plans that are available there. The 1 Kiosk Worker plan, and then the 3 enterprise plans. There was an E2 plan, but that was removed by Microsoft. Basically, the difference between E1 and E2 was E1 only allowed you to have read access on the Office web apps, or Office Online as now is. And that's basically changed so that E1 now gives you full read-write access on those. So as you can see with the E3 plan, that's typically where we see most customers purchasing because it includes the Office 365 Pro Plus client. But it also includes the enterprise features of Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, and Link Online, as well as giving you the rights management piece there. The E4 plan extends on the E3 by offering Link Enterprise Voice capabilities. typically in a deployment scenario, because there's only a few partners that can do the enterprise voice piece as an online solution, that's typically deployed as a hybrid solution. So looking at the traditional licensing model of licensing Office, so Office is, if you buy Office Pro Plus or Office Standard 2013, historically there's always been licensed on a per device basis. So every device that uses or accesses Office needs to have a license assigned to it. Roaming rights, which are if you deploy Office on a remote desktop services server, basically allow you to log into that session running Office from outside of the corporate premises. But roaming rights is only available with software assurance. Now there is an issue there whereby if a user is using, let's say, an iPad to log into their Citrix or remote desktop services session, they're using Office, as soon as they walk through the front door of the corporate premises, that now requires an Office license because those roaming rights only apply outside of the corporate premises. Okay. In terms of installation, it typically can have longer installation times. It takes longer to actually start using the product from the time you start installing it. Now with the Office 365 model, it licenses the user as opposed to the device. So now it offers the user the ability to use up to 5 PCs or Macs to have a locally installed Office client. Also allows up to 5 tablet devices and 5 mobile phones as well. Because of the way Office is deployed, it streams down to the client. We see, you can start using Office within kind of 5 to 10 minutes of clicking the install button, because it downloads the kind of most commonly used features first and then streams down the rest of the Office package behind the scenes. Also, with the per device model, the volume licensing media for Office, it's not technically possible to have 2 different versions of Office running side by side on a machine. They conflict with each other, but with the Office 365 it is possible to have that Office running side by side with a different version of Office. So the Office 365 Enterprise plans also offer on-premises access rights. So even if you're not ready to start consuming all of Microsoft's online services today, it might be worthwhile looking at Office 365 from a licensing perspective, as well as obviously taking advantage of the services there. So if we look at the E3 plan, for example, that's giving you access to your on-premises Exchange server, but it's also providing the enterprise features of Exchange, SharePoint, and Lync. It's also providing that per user Office 365 Pro Plus Office client. And then if you look at the E4, it's then providing the Lync Plus CAL. These suites don't include the rights to access a Windows server or the rights to manage a device using System Center Configuration Manager. So there are things called bridge CALs, which you can purchase in addition to the enterprise plans, which provide access to obviously Windows servers. Typically, if you're buying a net new licenses with software assurance, it will work out to be more cost effective to purchase via an Office 365 Enterprise plan than it would be to purchase the kind of perpetual licenses. So if I give you an indication of how Office 365 can reduce the number of Office licenses you require, within the dotted line there is the corporate premises. We've got Office deployed on the server, either via virtual desktop infrastructure or through remote desktop services. As you can see, within the corporate premises, each device that is logging on or using Office on the server, even though it's not physically deployed on the actual client, it still requires an Office license to be assigned to each one of those devices. If those users go home and log on to their virtual desktop or the remote desktop session, again, because these licenses don't have software assurance, those devices require an Office license as well. If we add a software assurance, you'll now see that the users, when they go home, no longer need to have an Office license assigned to any of those devices. So this is where the roaming rights comes into play, whereby the user of a licensed device within the corporate premises that has software assurance is able to log in to their session from any device outside of the corporate premises. And they can be personally owned or they can be owned by the organization. Now, if we look at the Office 365 licensing, because each of those users is licensed, it reduces the number of licenses they require. So we've got 2 of those users inside the corporate premises that have got multiple devices, so they've got a PC or a thin client and a tablet device. Because we're licensing the user, we only need to have the 1 user license as opposed to 2 device licenses. And again, that extends outside of the corporate premises. So Office 365 Pro Plus licensing can really help with bring your own device licensing. So customers that have software assurance on the Core CAL or the Enterprise CAL suites, and also have Office Pro Plus licensed through an enterprise agreement or through a Select Plus agreement, again with software assurance, can purchase Office 365 through a discounted part code called the Office 365 add-ons. Now, Microsoft have heavily discounted these Office 365 add-ons to take into account that you've already invested in the Core CAL or Enterprise CAL and the Office Pro Plus client. So for very little money, you can now add on Office 365 to your agreements. So there are a number of different ways of purchasing Office 365. If you've got an enterprise or if you're starting an enterprise agreement, the minimum number of users is 250. So you need to buy one of the enterprise plans. If all you're buying through the enterprise agreement is the online service, so Office 365 E3 for example, the minimum is 250. Typically an enterprise agreement has to include all of your users in the estate. However, if all you're doing is buying the online service and no kind of on-premises licenses, then you can choose however many users you want to include within that. You can also purchase through the Microsoft Online Services portal. It doesn't have the same rights as purchasing through volume licensing, so you just need to be careful that accessing on-premises servers, you need to make sure you're buying those through the volume licensing program rather than the online services portal, which is kind of direct with Microsoft. You can also purchase through the open license program, so for smaller organizations, the minimum is 5 licenses. The subscription term is always 12 months as a minimum. And recently announced was the Microsoft Products and Services Agreement, which is a new initiative called Next Generation Volume Licensing, which is going to replace what we know or have known over the years. So things like enterprise agreements, Select Plus agreements will all be rolled into the MPSA over the next few years. So a fairly new announcement was the Office for iPad. Now the Office for iPad is a free app which you can download from the Apple App Store. The free version basically allows you to view documents and to present using the kind of PowerPoint equivalent. But if you want full editing capabilities, then you need to purchase an Office 365 plan which includes the Office 365 Pro Plus client. That then unlocks the rights to edit documents. So if you buy one of the Office 365 Pro Plus plans, or a plan that includes the Office 365 Pro Plus client, you can then edit documents. One of the things to be wary of is where you have users going out and buying a consumer version of Office 365 to allow them to use Office 365, Office for iPad, because the consumer version of the Office 365 subscription doesn't include commercial use rights. So once you've subscribed to your Office 365 subscription, you can then use Office on 5 PCs or Macs, 5 tablet devices, and 5 phones. And as we said, it's including the Office 365, the Office for iPad client as well. So that's it. It's a very quick overview of the licensing. Those people with existing agreements, it can be quite complex in terms of the options available to you to purchase. So as I said, we would encourage you to contact your Bytes account manager and discuss further. With that, I'll hand back to Sarah for Q&A.
Okay, so we've had our first question come through from Abdul, who asks, on the on-premise access slide, Link Enterprise CALs is not listed. Why?
So that is included with the on-premises access rights. So if you purchase the E3 Enterprise plan, that will also include both the standard and the Enterprise on-premises access rights to.
Okay, lovely. And the next question from Andy asks, can you script a sync process to run every time a device is connected to the network?
I'm assuming he's talking about the OneDrive synchronization of documents, in which case that will happen automatically in the background. So I just click the sync now in order to hurry up the process for the sake of the demo. It just happens without you needing to worry about scripting it, as long as you have the OneDrive turned on, which it by default will turn on and just run in the background, and you can not, the users never need to actually press any buttons or even know it's there.
Okay, lovely. Hopefully, Andy, that answers your question. We've got another question here from Brian, who says, can I ask, is offline updating available with all the license plans, such as E1 and E3, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely is. Yeah.
Lovely. And what are the Project Visio benefits with the E3 plan?
So there are different part codes available to purchase Visio for Office 365 and Project Pro for Office 365. So they're not included within any of the enterprise plans. You need to purchase those separately. But they are licensed in a very similar way in terms of being per user, and again allowing a single user to use on up to 5 devices or 5 concurrent devices. So they're not included within the enterprise plans, but can be bought separately.
And the next question from Vivian. If required, can data be stored on UK servers?
So this is one where the short answer is no and the long answer is yes. So Office 365 as it stands is not in the UK, so there's a data centre in Dublin and there's a data centre in Amsterdam. So for UK customers, data would be within the EU, but it would not be on UK soil. That said, there are various hosting providers who work with Microsoft, and actually we've done this with some government customers, where essentially you have an Office 365-like experience it's not technically Office 365, but it gives you the same functionality. And so one of the things we would discuss as part of a solution assessment workshop is actually, do you have legal requirements about data sovereignty? How can we best apply that? How can we approach that? What would need to be on the UK? What would be okay in Office 365? And come out with a plan which gives you what you need from a regulations point of view, while still giving you all of the rich functionality of Office 365.
Lovely, thank you. And Francesco asks, for Exchange and SharePoint, is a hybrid solution available, e.g. retaining a local Exchange server while still using Exchange services provided by Office 365?
Yes, it's the short answer, and there are different options in terms of Exchange. Quite often, if you've got a very large organisation during the migration stages, we will be moving over some mailboxes at a time rather than everybody all at once, just because of the time it takes to move data. So there will be a sort of hybrid period. Sometimes people will choose to have on Office 365 for, say, external contractors, and actually Microsoft did that for a while, where all of the external users were, all of the contractors and vendors were on Office 365 and full-time employees were on-premise Exchange. So yes, absolutely, there are ways of doing that. With SharePoint, again, you can have different options. So we sometimes see it where somebody will have their intranet running on-premise and an extranet running in Office 365. So there are issues around making sure you've got search set up, so if your users are searching for files, they're finding them on both. So there are various things you need to think about. So it's not as simple as picking one or the other, but absolutely yes, and Core have built solutions that exist in that hybrid way.
Lovely, thank you. And a question here from Colin. When you're transferring to Office 365, a number of domain registrars do not have all the required DNS options to make this seamless and this makes seamless transfer much harder. Which registrar, domain, email, DNS providers are better for Office 365?
That is a very, very good question, and one I don't know the answer to off the top of my head. If you go through the Office 365 portal, I believe there are some suggestions. Otherwise, I'm not sure. We may need to get back to you on that one.
That's fine, Colin. We can follow up with that outside of the webinar and get back to you. And there's another question here from Francesco who says, is Office 365 subject to the US Patriotism Act even though the data is hosted in the EU?
There was a recent announcement regarding EU changes. We can point to that on when we send out the link for the presentation afterwards, because it's quite a lengthy document.
Lovely, thank you. And Abdul asks, if you have link on premise for all users, but also want 20 users to host webinars with external parties, i.e. using Link Online, would those 20 users have 2 separate accounts?
So external users coming into Link Conference don't need to be licensed. So unless they're authenticating into your Active Directory, that's the only time you'd need to have a Link license. So external people coming into a conference, no licenses are required. And that's the same with on-premise Link as it is with Office 365.
Okay, lovely. Well, thank you very much, everybody. That's all of the questions for today. Thank you for joining us on the webinar.